Great. So we have Ginger Wireman, who conducts outreach and education activities for the Washington State Department of Ecology's nuclear waste program, and specifically teaching about Hanford cleanup. And she's going to be talking to us today about public participation in climate action. So, and Ginger, just let me know if and what you need. It seems like a smaller group, but if you want to do the breakouts at any point, I'm happy to help with that. So just let me know.
Yeah, I think we can hopefully do a breakout at the end, towards the end. So that's, I don't know how many people are on, maybe just two. I think just 2 rooms would be fine. We don't need to break it down more than that. So good morning, everyone. My name's Ginger. Can everybody hear me okay? I can put on a headset if you need it. It looks like Wendy's nodding. Everybody okay? Okay, great. So yes, I'm Ginger Wireman. I am coming to you from South Central Washington. I am on the ceded lands of the Yakima, Nez Perce, but the lands that traditional homelands of the Umatilla, Cayuse, and Walla Walla people, and they are now known as the Umatilla, Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla. And I do normally, I'm in a weird spot where my title is Community Outreach and Environmental Education Specialist. So I help with public information for traditional environmental permitting for the Hanford cleanup. Hanford was the site where the plutonium for the Trinity test and the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki was developed, and also continued making plutonium throughout the Cold War. So it's a huge, super fun cleanup, a big lift, lots and lots of required legal public engagement. But we also do a lot of outreach and education. And so I go to classrooms and Rotary clubs and Kiwanis, and because I have these networks that I've built with STEM educators and teachers, I'm also often invited to talk about sustainability in general and climate change in particular. So the professional organizations that I am a member of and whose conferences and trainings I go to are kind of different. I'm a member of the International Association of Public Participation, which I'll talk about more, and I have been a member of the North American Association for Environmental Education, which is how I found out about CLEAN a couple of years ago at the conference in Kentucky. So I get on these calls with these disparate groups and hear people talking about climate issues, climate adaptation, climate resiliency, climate education, and I worry oftentimes about the silos that it seems that we're in. So just, your educators, I don't know how many of you were classroom teachers or professors versus non-formal. I know there's a lot of non-formal educators on here. But so I just was like, okay, so what's the definition of education? And because I was searching for material and Martin Luther King's birthday was coming up, the first thing that came up in the Google search was a long piece that MLK had written in 1947 about education and what he thought about education. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but some of the takeaways that he had was, education must train one for quick, resolute, and effective thinking. To think incisively and to think for oneself is very difficult. We are prone to let our mental life become invaded by legions of half-truths, prejudices, and propaganda. And a great majority of the so-called educated people do not think logically and scientifically. So he, in 1947 wrote this, and I don't think we could have a better example of what he is talking about and the concerns about education and how education works and whether it's doing its job. We've seen this in the last 4 years, and also around the climate fight is whether people are actually being educated or indoctrinated or just lied to. So definitions, dictionary definitions, educate to provide schooling for, developmentally, morally, or aesthetically, especially by instruction, inform to communicate knowledge to. So this is a picture of one of my super exciting public meetings that we have about Hanford. The guy in the yellow shirt looks like he's in the middle of a yawn. But environmental education, of course, is more than just information about the environment. Increasing public awareness, knowledge of environmental issues, does teach individuals critical thinking, does enhance individuals' problem solving and decision-making skills, does not advocate a particular viewpoint. And particularly with classroom teachers, we hear them doing gymnastics and fearing that they are going to get themselves in trouble when they're trying to teach about climate, because so many parts of the country are still not grappling with the truth or reality. And climate denial has been presented all along as an equal argument. Whereas environmental information, it just provides facts or opinions, doesn't necessarily teach critical thinking, doesn't necessarily enhance the problem solving, and may advocate a particular viewpoint. So I think we've had a lot of environmental information out in the public sphere, but not necessarily legitimate education with the supports that are needed to help people gain better understanding. So then I looked at what the Environmental Protection Agency says environmental education is, and I think this is really interesting. And the highlights are mine: engage in problem solving and take action, motivation to improve or maintain environmental quality, skills to identify and help resolve environmental challenges, participation in activities that lead to the resolution of environmental challenges. So the EPA's definition of environmental education does lead to forming opinions and taking action. So I think that's really important. So from the other side of my job, public engagement, when do we engage? When do we start engaging? And this is a photograph from September of this year. I live on the Columbia River at the confluence of the Columbia, Snake, and Yakima rivers. And we had more than 2 weeks of smoke from wildfires in the Northwest, and actually California smoke was coming up here as well. It was unbearable. It would have been a great time to engage the public in conversations about climate and start educating people about climate, or asking them to think about where we can begin taking action. So engaging is occupying the attention or efforts of a person, attracting and holding fast, and or personal level, occupying oneself and becoming involved. So the International Association for Public Participation is known as IAP2, and it has quite a set of core values. Among them is the belief that those who are affected by a decision have a right to be involved in the decision. And I think it was Jim, when we started the call, he had the announcement about the millions that California has for fighting climate change, and the children being aghast to find out money is not being spent properly. Who's making the decisions around that? The public participation includes the promise that the public's contribution will influence the decision. Who decided where to spend that money that California is gathering? How was that process conducted? Public participation seeks out and facilitates the involvement of those potentially affected by or interested in a decision. So the students that Jim's talking about have discovered that money was being mismanaged, and I bet they were never invited to help decide the process by which the money was to be spent. So public participation and the IAP2 is very different in the IAP2 spectrum and code of ethics than, say, the traditional communications realm of journalism, which is more, just sort of supposedly presenting unbiased information, or public relations, which is usually geared towards shaping an idea without a two-way conversation, right? And we know that the public relations done by the fossil fuel industry, big ag, et cetera, has been very influential in public opinion, and it has not been education, it's been public relations, it's been influencing without any, some might say without any ethics or values. So the IAP2, I'm sorry about the fuzziness of this is a screenshot. And I do have these organizations' websites later. They have this spectrum, maybe you just inform the public. And we've all heard decide, announce, defend, right? Most of us have lived in a community where some planning process has happened, whether it's a new street light or whether or not to kill the recycling program, and the city just makes the decision without the public involved, consulting, asking the public, but maybe not actually taking their opinion, involving, working with the public, and we'll consider your concerns and aspirations and take the feedback into consideration. Collaborate is more of a partnership, and the promise to the public is we'll look for you the advice and we'll build your recommendations into the decision making. And then of course, empower would be placing the final decision making on the public. Again, if there had been a transparent and public process, or a number of them around the state of California, to decide how those climate change funds would be spent, and the public values were weighed in, you know, maybe they plant the trees and they actually have a volunteer corps ready to hand water and weed and keep the competition away to keep those trees alive, instead of just throwing money in the ground and wasting it. So we had our International Association for Public Participation International Conference the first week of September. And one of the sessions was from Vancouver. They have a climate emergency response plan. And this is from one of their, from their presentation. And the very first bullet is understand people's understandings. And so to me, that's, what do people know? What do people understand? Now they had that, what's the word? They had the funding, they hired a professional polling organization to poll people in the city. And they discovered that 92% of Vancouverites are concerned about climate change. However, only 7% understand what the main source of GHG contributors are in the Vancouver area. And it's natural gas, and it's actually for heating buildings primarily, because they also have Northwest, you know, we have the hydropower. So we don't do anything with coal for our electric supply very often. I mean, it's a very tiny part of our mix. So they needed a better informed public for engagement. So here are some things. They actually started their first climate action planning in 2009, and they've updated their plan. And these are some infographics that they're using. And you can see these are extremely clear, very concise. Don't talk about the why, behind the climate change. Why is this happening? But certainly explain what we need to be considering. And you can see that the information is created so that it invites people to engage and take action. And here are the things it suggests that you can take action with. You can convert your oil, natural gas, or electric heating system to an efficient heat pump to add summer cooling, add insulation, increase shade around your home by planting trees, etc. So these on the side, what to expect, that creates awareness and helps with understanding. Those highlights awareness and understanding, gives the reader skills to identify challenges, allows them to act and resolve. Those are the language that was used in the EPA definition of environmental education. And here we have a winter one, and they actually have, it's interesting, they have one for each season plus an additional one about sea level rise. And the sea level rise doesn't really have anything that you can do personally. Imagine that. So, you know, for this is the flooding and winter melt. So interestingly, in their update, they decided, or they discovered, that continuous learning and re-navigation is essential for adaptation planning, giving the underpinning of uncertainty and extended timelines. And they actually are working with the University of British Columbia and partnering with their Sustainability Scholars Program to engage college students in the in planning and research as they go on. Now, the Kresge Foundation did a research project in 2016 called Climate Adaptation, the State of Practice in US Communities. And it looked at 17 communities and case studies across the United States. And all of them had education in their planning as some part of their planning and activity, but only 2 universities were mentioned in the case studies out of the 17 cities. And those were actually as partners for funding, and 2 were mentioned as partners in doing research. So the overlap, even though they recognize that public information and education is critical to ensuring that the public and private sector engage and are prepared, they are not working with educators. So Here's if we can, let's see if I can do the gallery view. I wanted to do just a little quickie. I don't know if I can get it so that I can see everybody at once, but I was thinking we could do a little break here. Thumbs up if your community has begun climate planning, sideways if you don't know, and down if they are not yet. So we've got, of the people that I can see, not everybody has their camera on. We've got kind of a mix. Some are planning, some are not planning. Mine is not planning. Mine won't say climate change in any public documents. So yeah, I see the look of pain on Paige's face. Right. So, and now I've got the screen so I can't see the other part. So who's in charge of the public participation? Well, the municipal staff. You've got your utilities manager, your head of planning, maybe a city manager, emergency management planners. Maybe they're leading on it. Some cities, the staff themselves are very well educated and very well prepared to lead these things. Some cities, they hire consultants. What is the background of the consultants? Are the consultants urban planners or communications consultants? What is their capability? Where are they getting their information? How do they seek the public participation? In the Vancouver plan, this was their 2020 update that they were working on that they presented at the conference, and they had, you know, your traditional public meetings and workshops, but they also were using videos, social media. They do a great job of going where the people are. They have pop-up booths in parks. They go to special events. They go to happy hour. They have trivia nights. And they do all this great public interaction and education. And they actually developed a video in which the video has a little more background about how global warming is affecting things. And it's not just this is what's going to happen, but a little background. Unfortunately, with COVID, their project kind of got truncated, and I'm sure they'll revive it as soon as it's safe to do that. So this is where I'm thinking, where can CLEAN or the environmental education community in general fit in? So, you know, as individuals and through your institution, can you reach out to municipal officers? Most of the people did thumbs up, so something is going on in your community, and maybe we should do a thing, we can do that in the breakout. Is your non-formal education program involved? And because if you could support, if we could support, I know there's a lot of people from museums and other professional education. If we could support those municipal planners, if we could support the P2 professionals and the practitioners and help educate them, I think it would lead to better, quicker, more efficient, hopefully, planning, because obviously things are happening quickly and things need to scale up, but they need to scale up properly. We don't want to throw public money, especially when we're in a recession because of COVID. We don't want to throw money at half-baked plans, and we need stuff that the public is going to buy in and support, but also that they understand. So can museums or professional organizations in your community, your citizens climate lobby volunteers, can you help with on the ground inclusion and planning processes? Do you already have connections? Do you have, perhaps you have a summer school program at your museum or your park organization? Can you help facilitate those urban planners and P2 practitioners to come where you're already getting the people together so that they don't have to have, I mean, they still have to have their traditional meetings that are required by a legal permitting process probably, but are there more and better ways to get more people to the table and more voices, and perhaps more voices who's got stake in it, the youth, right? We know that the kids, everybody's saying, oh, the kids are gonna save us. Well, the kids shouldn't have to save us. The grownups need to do our damn jobs. But hearing the children's opinion is probably really important to the adults, and it's important to the budget managers. So in the interest of breaking down those silos, and I can paste these in the chat or the slideshows saved, there's the International Association for Public Participation. There's the American Society of Adaptation Professionals, the Association of Climate Change Officers, the American Planning Association. So these are people that are doing, either helping to facilitate or leading the work on the ground in the cities where anything is happening. And just a little bit, I mean, the American Climate Change Officers Group, I just stumbled on that while I was working on this presentation. I didn't even know this organization existed, and they have a certification program with all of these classes. And I don't know if you guys, hopefully it's big enough, but I'll just read some of them. They have like climate science risk and adaptation planning, governance, engagement, and behavior change, and then the more wonky stuff, GHG management and reporting. This organization is primarily urban planners, city managers, and engineers, and the science side of things. The only person on their steering committee that I could see that was an educator is actually in the sustainability group at a university, as opposed to teaching sustainability. She's on the planning side. And so I would love to see how these classes are actually taught and who's actually teaching the classes and what is the basis for their information, and should there be more overlap with non-formal or university professors. The other one, American Society for Adaptation Professionals. This is really interesting. They have all these interest groups, and these guys are good with, they're clever with their acronyms, because American Society of Adaptation Professionals gets to be ASAP. We need to do this as soon as possible. And for their equity and inclusion group, they call it JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So they get the cute acronym, which other people, I have heard that's not unique, but my agency is still calling it DEIR, which is just lame. Very thoughtful people, really interesting. Again, not necessarily in the education realm. And so I think there's room for overlap. So now is when I was hoping we could do some breakout sessions. And here are the prompts that I thought we could discuss in the breakout sessions, and then we can come back together and see if people had any ideas. So where is there room for collaboration? And are there barriers to partnerships? Why can't you, or why do you think you wouldn't be welcome partnering, or has it ever occurred to you? So can we do breakouts?
Yeah, and how many did you want, Ginger? I think we ended up with, there's 14 people in the room, but I'll try to stay in here and probably just make sure people get in the room and things like that. So without you and I, it's like 12. Do you want to do 2 breakout rooms?
Let's just do 2. Let's just do 2. Thank you.
All right, so I've opened the rooms and folks
Let's just
can
do
join.
about, what time is it? 28. Let's do like 7 minutes.
It's the last minute. I don't know.
That's fine. No, I like to count down. It gives me, a little jolt. So I put up, we had some discussion about, the barriers being funding. If our programming is maxed out and we can't expand what we're already doing. We had some discussions about, again, working with existing youth outreach programs that educators or non-formal educators may be running, and utilizing existing meetings. In the other group, did you guys have anything you wanted to share out?
I think Katya should share about boundary expanders, because I think that's what we're all being called to be right now. Do you want to share that? That was awesome.
Sure. It's actually spanners, but I like expanders because I think that's appropriate as well. But it's just a term. It comes from kind of the community engagement realm. There's an engaged scholarship consortium that's an academic conference and group of folks that do community engagement from an academic perspective. And they introduced me to the term boundary spanners. And that, I think we all play that role where we speak the language of educators and teachers. And then we also have to speak the language of climate change officers and municipalities And it takes a lot of capacity to be that translator and provide opportunities for those two worlds to interact. So that builds on Ginger, what you shared from the IAP, that community engagement level. I think that it takes expertise to be able to facilitate that engagement.
What was the group that you talked about of the?
It's called the Engaged Scholarship Consortium.
Okay.
I don't know if it's that pertinent. It's mostly social science, but they do have a outreach professionals working group that has these workshops on boundary spanning at their annual conference. But I've always wanted to have a stronger science presence at those meetings, because they're usually pretty, but I would say they have a strength in social justice, but they focus a lot on service learning and kind of ed community engagement. So.
And I think that so much of what we need to do has room for service learning and you know, engaging the youth too. See thumbs up. No, and I think most urban planners, unfortunately, or many urban planners, are just trained to check the boxes for public engagement. So depending on your community, engagement really may just be a checkbox and just as half-assed as possible because they don't want to spend the money or take the time. And, you know, I see people like Boulder and Fort Collins and, you know, some cities where, gosh, some of the Colorado cities, like 70% of the city staff has been trained in the IAP2 public participation spectrum and is expected to engage in that way with the citizenry. And then you have other places where they consider it a huge burden. And so that's, you know, to me, educators, sometimes they're not respected, but I think most people respect educators or respect their local museums and parks and stuff. And so having it come from maybe a more gentle or a different angle that people aren't thinking about, having true engagement. Oh, okay.
Is it helpful also across state lines in a good way? As people, you know, I don't want to put California as always the leader. It's not. It's among the leaders, okay? But there are agencies in California and in cities that have been excellent at encouraging the educators and the community engagers and recognizing that they can't do that very well. If communicating with them, so like maybe they can talk to their peers. I'm thinking, for instance, the California Energy Commission. Really, really been good. They don't have a lot of education and do things, but they just totally turned us loose and gave us room and wanted to, you know, gave us opportunities, just paid for things for, you know, the space and things that other places have similar functions in their state of look what can happen if you just work with the educators. You know, that yes, they can do the public engagement and so on. Don't forget to do that. Like how the city of Berkeley, how the city of San Francisco, you know, who are these officials? The mayor would come and thank us for what we were doing. I mean, you know, there are places, you know, just, oh, you got volunteers doing this. We got to thank you. Here's, you know, all kinds of stuff. Having other mayors recognize you got to include your educators. So.
Throw in the chat, if you care to check it out, the Fargo project, which I found to be really cool because you don't automatically think who's really good at civic collaboration and environmental engagement. Fargo! But yeah, there it is. This is a phenomenal example of a project that addresses environmental needs while bringing in the environmental issues the city was having and educators and artists. It's a really cool collaboration and example.
Thank you.
Let me, if I could, I put in the chat another resource, the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation, which brings people in all the kind of facilitative roles together in one place. And there's a breakout group I've been part of for years on climate. But I wanted to note part of the strength of IAP2, which gives really great training, is they are training public officials to do this kind of deep work. And it's well designed with role plays and so forth. And the other was NCDD. At one point we did a workshop where we brought in champions of this kind of change. We brought in mayors and city planners who really, really understood it and could model the behavior and were influencing their peers. They came in as our resources, and then they helped explain to educators and engagement professionals, if you want to work with the cities, here's how you do it. Here's the kind of expertise you have. Here's the language you need to use, how to position yourself. So that was another one of these spanning, boundary spanning operations.
Thanks, Nancy. I'd forgotten about NCDD, and I've actually gone to some of their conferences and trainings too, and very, very interesting and really good at bridging hard topics and modeling. Something that Jim said and the boundary spanning thing, when I was looking at trying to find examples of, where is education, where is it the urban planners, how are they doing this? And I mentioned the Hermosa Beach, California example. And if you look at a map, they have a thing, the Climate Action Planning LARC in Los Angeles. And like they have a map that shows, plan is developed, plan is in the works, plan is adopted, no plan. and how, that's another thing. How do we expand so that when you're in a megalopolis like Los Angeles, you don't literally cross the city boundary into, an urban heat island hellhole because nobody thought to plant trees. When next door it's beautiful. I mean, it just can perpetuate the environmental harms and the racism and all of that stuff if we don't figure out how to not just expand into the practices, but help support the neighbors, and get the neighbors involved, because it doesn't make any sense, particularly if you're building a beach and then the next door neighbors don't build the beach. And Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, there's another area that hasn't been mentioned yet, but some of us on here have actually dabbled in it a bit, and that is to work with artists. And you can do a lot with climate change and art, or sustainability in art. I've been involved in a number of projects. There is a group in GSA and an AGU that works with artists, and it reaches a new audience. And sometimes that's what's needed in a community to fill in some gaps and make it more of a community-oriented endeavor.
Who's Emily? I don't know who's facilitating at this point.
I thanks, Jim, for calling out artists. As a visual artist, I think that there's some curation that we can talk about for what the climate art is, because I would, at this point in sort of my career track, be very specific about what art we need, about pulling out positive visual outliers from communities and amplifying those through a variety of different media, and that just calling it climate art is probably no longer sufficient. And I think we need to get real more specific about what those images and, well, not even just images, but what that art means and how to frame it, and providing tools to, again, bridge those gaps, because that is not formal training that, at least the arts communities here are working on. And then to kind of go back to the local stuff, again, I'm glad Nancy is here, because one of the things that we've been kind of facing with is, Ginger, you were saying how to get to your neighbors. I think the Central Coast has done an amazing job about trying to pull in the different communities and boundaries. And then the question really becomes like a scaling issue, like a geospatial, how do we call which things just to define programs, because people really are reaching out. And then we're not really sure how to frame programs, because we are trying to include all of those different sets. Like we're not really drawing boundaries. That becomes a whole different challenge. Just that's a thing that we're still trying to figure out.
Yeah.
One of the things I think, to the extent we're looking at state and city agencies and is knowing the amount of power or what the resources they have just to use that do that. And by the way, big shout out to the artists. I mean, when I speak of our work with California and cities about education, it was always alongside artists. It was always, I mean, it's always there. It's always a big component of it. But the cities have parks. The cities have senior centers. They have, the libraries. They have all these resources that they can just, they have to make an agreement, but it's basically, okay, today we're going to have this subject. We can have our civic center be a place for this. So come and fill it with activities. Let's make something. Now, I realize we still have COVID. I hope we're on the downside of COVID. At least we're through the halfway point. I hope. So, I mean, at some point there's going to be physical events again. But the state also, the amount of resources, places the state has for social engagement. I just want to point that out because, of course, we want to work in the schools. Obviously, we want to work in the schools, but we're not limited to what goes on in the schools. And the schools can be bussed over. I mean, kids love field trips. Schools love field trips. We have found that the cities in the state do not seem to have much trouble coming up with the resources for events around climate of action. I mean, the whole civic center today is going to be a big thing. Earth Day. Okay, we're going to have an Earth Day event, and we're going to make a big thing. But we need educators to make this cool and family-oriented. So.
Yeah. Well, and I think that those civic spaces, pushing, encouraging, supporting the urban planning community and the consultants to say, step out of the Tuesday night meeting and the Tuesday night workshop and go to the museum on Saturday afternoon or go to the park on Saturday afternoon when the families are already there, and educating and engaging them in places where they already are there, and use that. And most of those places are not 100% privately funded. Most of them have city funding. So the city should be using those facilities as an expansion of their efforts. But if they don't think of it, so it looks like we are getting close. Anybody else have Jen?
Well, I just had a last, I think this has come up a few times in different conversations, but we talked earlier about capacity for municipalities to do kind of engagement work. And I think one thing that we're, sort of hoping or maybe hoping to see in the new Biden administration is some kind of reimagining or rethinking about AmeriCorps or a Climate Corps. And I know, Tiffany, you were mentioning that the teacher program that you're working on, but connecting those people directly with municipalities to help on that front, because I wonder too, it is like how I don't know how realistic it is to think that municipalities have the bandwidth to go and do public events. But if they had somebody in place that was, working, whose specific work was to help on that public engagement piece and, help sort of facilitate some of those pieces, like that's the kind of thing where I think it's just like thinking outside a box and reimagining like who your partners are, what those partners look like, what roles people play in communities, because we've all been so siloed. We have to stop being siloed, and we have to sort of like get rid of those labels and like start thinking more systematically and holistically around what we need to do to achieve this sort of more collective action around climate resilience, like within communities or cities or wherever you are. So I'll stop now, sorry.
Yay, so you're thinking about it. You're all thinking about it already. So that's good.
I'm going to add just a quick 1 minute footnote building on what Emily said. This is not, it's a political issue. It's a technology issue. It's science. It's also deeply emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And to make room for the emotional work, and Emily's saying, be really cautious that the messaging that we're doing in the end helps people's agency, collective sense of being able to work together, focusing on the successes that are already emerging.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I was going to ask you, I don't know if any of you at the NAAE, Ayanna, Elizabeth Johnson wrote that book, All We Can Save. I really, really recommend the book because it has some scary and depressing stuff, but I mean, most of it is an approach of hope. And I think that's so important to us to be making sure that we try to focus on solutions and hope. It's not going to look in 30 years like it looks now. But we have got to figure out how we make it livable and how we partner. So I'm glad that you guys were receptive, and any other feedback you guys want to shoot me an email. My information is on the screen still, I think. And I will see people soon next week. Anything else?
Thanks, Ginger.